London. Well, probably the first thing to say is we're going to feature Ukraine today. Huge amount going on around Ukraine, through Ukraine, but at the end of the day, a really appalling war with gross slaughter. But this appears to be one conflict that the West wants to keep going for as long as possible. So it shouldn't surprise us that we've seen a huge amount in the press about the West providing more weapons, in particular missiles and storm shadows. But of course, if anybody else wants to bring their missiles in, Iran, for instance, where it's been rumoured that ballistic missiles have been transferred to the Russians, well, it's Western weapons good, Eastern weapons bad. But there can be no doubt that British politicians are desperate to escalate this war. And I'll just say to our viewers that on Friday's news edition with Mike Robinson, there was some really detailed information about what had been reported around Ukraine, and you can see this on the show notes from the UK column website, but I've posted some of them on screen just so that world viewers of UK column can get some idea of the detail. And of course the timestamps also go with this. So if you haven't seen Friday's news, I'd encourage you to go back and have a look at this. But let's start by featuring Admiral Bauer, who is the Dutch admiral who's in charge, the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. Let's hear his message about the wonders of Ukraine.
The NATO Military Committee is honored to have been so warmly received despite the heavy rains in the beautiful Czech Republic. We're grateful to our hosts for bringing us here together at such a crucial time for our alliance. Today, the NATO military authorities discussed the two Herculean tasks that we need to undertake simultaneously. While continuing and ramping up our support to Ukraine, we must also bolster our own deterrence and defense. Over the past year, we have made huge strides in making NATO's new defense plans fully executable. NATO now has 500,000 troops on high readiness. We established the Allied Reaction Force. We are adapting our command and control structure, and allies are rapidly developing and expanding their capabilities. Training and exercises play a key role in that. This year, the alliance held its largest collective defense exercise since the Cold War, Steadfast Defender. Over 90,000 troops from across the alliance exercised in Germany, Poland, and the 3 Baltic states. This demonstrates that a new era of collective defense is upon us, and NATO is stronger and readier than ever. But the responsibility for freedom does not rest on the shoulders of those in uniform alone. Today, the chiefs of defense discussed the fact that strong deterrence requires strong societal resilience. It requires a whole-of-society approach with a keen role for the private sector. Not only our defense industries, but our whole economies need to realize that peace is no longer a given.
So an amazing statement there. Some of this is pure theatre, of course, because at the moment everything points to the fact that NATO is in a complete shambles, and this is why defence plans have got to be gripped. We can't produce enough ammunition. NATO stocks run out in some countries, all as a result of the attempts to prop up Ukraine. But what does he say to us? Well, you can expect war and more war to the extent that it's going to absorb the whole of Western societies. I believe this man and his committee are extremely dangerous because nobody is talking about stopping the war in Ukraine. But maybe it gets worse because let's pop this one on screen. We've got the Kyiv Independent here. Zelensky to present the US with a victory plan in September. Things not going well for Ukraine in the war, but we are to believe that Zelensky and his team have come up with a victory plan. That's got to be presented to the Americans, because without the Americans, there will be no victory for Ukraine. If we take a look here at another article, it gets interesting because there's been a big spat recently because it was suggested that Zelensky might actually accept a ceasefire on certain sections of the front, but this has been refuted in the Kyiv Independent and here with Ukrainska Pravda. Basically, Zelensky's communication advisor, Dmytro Litvin, has said that this was a fake story and that Bild, the German newspaper, hadn't seen the plan, and what had been reported was complete nonsense. He goes on to say that nobody will give the Russians a Minsk III or any other format. Ukraine opposes any freezing of the war, and this stance is communicated by Ukrainian authorities at all levels. The victory plan will be presented to the United States first, because the United States can ensure the implementation of its content. They are desperate to have the Americans on board, because without the Americans, Ukraine will no longer be fighting this war. Now, if we have a look at the Kyiv Post, so this is all giving us a flavour of what's in the Ukrainian minds. The Kyiv Post is using the Institute for the Study of War maps and analysis. And effectively, therefore, the Kyiv Post is using this material alongside the BBC and the UK's Ministry of Defence to regurgitate their analysis. And the Institute for the Study of War themselves are also quoting military bloggers now. They're so desperate to understand what's happening on the front, they're using military bloggers. We've talked about the Institute before, but let's remind ourselves about the mission and what it has to say. It says the Institute for the Study of War advances an informed understanding of military affairs through reliable research, trusted analysis, and innovative education. We are committed to improving the nation's ability to execute military operations. They're talking about the US, and respond to emerging threats in order to, quote, achieve US strategic objectives. So this organization is all about US objectives, yet it tries to say that it's non-partisan. This is complete nonsense. Now, over the weekend, I came across this report from August, which is the Institute of War, talking about problems of restoring maneuver in the contemporary war of Ukraine. What it's really saying is the Ukrainians are losing, and they don't know how to deal with it. And it says that the United States and its allies and partners must understand and internalize the lessons of this war. So this is a battlefield laboratory, but the one thing this document does not talk about, apart from the odd word and certainly no numbers, is the casualty. But this is a battlefield laboratory which is a benefit not to the Ukrainians, but to the US, the UK, and the West. And here's the reality. It states that the Russians have gone over to the offensive along the entire line and appear intent on continuing offensive operations indefinitely. But of course, we've been told over weeks and months, and indeed years, that the Russians had or were going to run out of shells, and they were to lose to the wonder weapons of the Leopard, Challenger and Abrams tanks, and of course the F-16s. None of this has happened, all complete nonsense and propaganda for the Western public. What it does go on to say is that Ukraine faces enormous challenges today and in the months to come, and they're unlikely to be able to initiate significant counter-offensive operations in 2024 and into 2025. So a Russian offensive at the moment has parallels paralysed operations by the Ukrainians. But what does it go on to say? This should be a time of experimentation that should increasingly let Ukraine challenge Russian forces for the initiative in parts of the theatre while exploring opportunities for future more substantial counteroffensive operations. And of course, as the West experiments, Ukrainian troops die. Now, here's one of the maps from the Institute for the Study of War. And of course, what this is showing us is this institute, which is very powerful in the West, in UK, with the BBC and the UK Ministry of Defence. This is pushing for the use of long-range weapons, and it's showing you by the red marker pins where Russian targets are that can be reached by these new weapons. So this organisation is pushing extremely hard for these weapons to be used as part of the experimentation on the battlefield. And in this diagram, you can see how close these attacks can move to Moscow. So my question is, what would the West's outcry be if the Russian attacks were themselves taking place within 100 miles of London? But a lot of detail in these particular maps, and all of them are actually pushing for these weapons to be unleashed on Russian sovereign territory in order to keep the Ukrainian war going and the battlefield laboratory operating. It goes on here to say categorically that the West must provide Ukraine with long-range strike systems and the full permission to use them. And it also talks about missiles and drones, because essentially these things have to be used hand in glove. So this is one organisation highly influential in UK and the US, pushing for the use of these long-range weapons into Russia. And I'm going to restate that when you look at this report, there is absolutely no mention of circa 400,000 Ukrainian and 100,000 Russian dead. They don't feature because this is a battlefield laboratory for the West, and the fighting must continue for experimentation reasons until the last Ukrainian. Here's part of the conclusion. It says that helping Ukraine accomplish its task is vital for Ukraine's supporters as well. Unlocking the secrets, here's the detail, unlocking the secrets of effective warfare in the modern era will point the way for the future development of the war-fighting capabilities of the United States and its allies and partners around the world. So this is really sickening stuff, that the violence and the killing is to go on in Ukraine simply because the West's military-industrial complex can benefit and learn for future conflicts. Now, to do to carry out such a callous agenda, you need callous politicians. So let's bring one of Britain's finest on screen.
Keir Starmer has pledged £3 billion in aid to Ukraine that they can use for military use. That is more money, speed it up. They have asked for further missiles. We have provided them. We are in discussion with them about ensuring that they get through the winter in the strongest of position. As for Putin,
but they're not going to get through the winter if they're being rained down. Russian missiles
Putin said,
from Iran,
don't send,
raining down on them from Russian bases.
Putin said, don't send tanks. We sent them. Putin said, don't send any missiles. We sent them. Putin threatens every few months to use nuclear weapons. It's totally unaccepted. We won't be bullied by Putin's shameless grandstanding. What he should now do is cease his aggression and leave Ukraine. That's what he should do.
So some people in the UK call him chat box as we deliver this news, are calling this man a clown. Well, he may be a clown, but ultimately he's extremely arrogant, very, very dangerous. And ultimately it's beholden on the public of UK to bring this man to account. But this is the quality of politician under Keir Starmer, calling for direct attacks on Russian soil. And what will the Russian reaction be? Well, they've indicated in kind. So very, very dangerous. But if that's Lammy, let's bring our old friend Boris Johnson back on screen.
Mr. Johnson, do you have a message for Germany, for Chancellor Scholz? Do you think it's time for the long-range missiles coming from Germany?
I think that Olaf has done extraordinary things already, but I do think that the towers needs to be deployed, and I hope very much that the German government will do that. But I also, I think we all need to do more, and that includes the United Kingdom, the United States, France. We all need to do more together, but I'm sure we will.
How important are the U.S. elections for this war? Trump,
well,
Harris.
as I said just now, I hope very much that America will continue with the policy of supporting Ukraine, whoever is the president.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson.
So Boris Johnson there joyfully calling for the German equivalent of Storm Shadow to be unleashed on Russia. And these are quotes from him. It's heartbreaking to visit wounded veterans in recovery centres in Kyiv this weekend. But he goes on to say that some of these casualties could have been avoided if we had given Storm Shadow permissions earlier. So use of these weapons could have save lives. And this is another part of one of his quotes. There's no conceivable case for delay. The only person who fears escalation is Vladimir Putin. And every day that goes by is a lost opportunity to save lives and bring about a just conclusion to this war. This is the state of this man, jaded politician and now so-called media star. But just to end this segment, of course, the events around Trump over the weekend, well, yesterday, in fact, the BBC on the case, what we know about the Trump attack and the suspect. Of course, remember that for whatever his faults, Trump has said that if he's elected, he will put an end to the war in Ukraine. But here's the BBC, Ross Atkins, analysis editor under BBC Verify, really, to my mind, gloating about the event and getting very excited because he's discovered that Ryan Ruth, who's the man accused of being there ready to assassinate Trump, was at one stage recruiting soldiers for Ukraine. So the BBC getting very excited. But of course, if we go back, it was the BBC themselves here in March 2022 who were promoting mercenaries, people going to fight for money in Ukraine, those people being the guardians of democracy, humanity and heritage. Sickening hypocrisy by the BBC, and of course not one word of peace in Ukraine, certainly not in the form of a cessation to hostilities.